Hello. I am Karen Jean-François, and this is the Women in Data podcast. A podcast where every other week I interview some of the most inspiring women working in data. They discuss how data is used in various industries, share their knowledge and experience in the field, and equip you with tips to help you overcome challenges on your career and feel great. Let's get straight to it. Hello, Lizzie Harris and I are bringing you a special two-part episode in which we discuss going through redundancy and looking for a new job. Our hope is that our respective stories can help others going through similar situations. In this first part, we share our experience going through redundancy earlier this year. You will hear about what happened, how we felt and reacted, but also our coping mechanisms. You will then hear about how we approached looking for a new job and the challenges that came with that, such as writing a CV or pitching ourselves to the right level, especially as job titles are all over the place. The episode finishes with what we wish we had done differently. Before we get into the conversation, I just wanted to highlight that this is based on what myself and Lizzie have experienced this year. We recognize that everyone will have their own unique experience, and in fact, ours were quite different from each other. Meet me at the end to hear more about the part 2 that's coming out soon. Hey Lizzie, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Hey Karen, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you. I'm really glad to be chatting with you again on the podcast. I remember we did an episode together maybe a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, actually. And I think so.
And that was in lockdown.
I really loved recording that episode with you, and I'm glad we can do it again.
I'd like to say that I'm not in pajamas this time, but that would be a lie. So that's the good thing about podcasts, isn't it?
I spoke with someone yesterday and we were talking about working remotely and all these things, and she was saying she loves working from home because she can work in her pajamas and that it's like her superpower. So when she's in her pajamas, she can get so many things done. And I was thinking, yeah, that's the opposite for me.
Oh, I have a top half, bottom half rule though. So it looks at least not like pajamas.
So we're going to talk about a lot of things. So we both went through redundancy recently, looked for a new job, found a new job and all these things. But before we get into the topic, could I invite you to introduce yourself for people who don't know you yet?
Yeah, so I'm Lizzie Harris. I spent about 10 years working in all things customer and marketing analytics at Sainsbury's and loved every minute of that. And then a new opportunity arose for me to go to Gymshark to do analytics there as well, working with somebody that I'd worked with before. So I took the chance to do that. And within a year, I am now here talking to you.
I'm just thinking it must have been such a brave move to move from Sainsbury's to a different company, having spent that much time there. And then you had to go through redundancy quite early on in your time at Gymshark.
You never know that though, do you? You don't do that with that plan. Oh, I don't know if brave is the right word. It was definitely a decision that I had to think through a lot and definitely still wasn't sure about at the end. I think I've learned a lot more since then about how to make better decisions. And it's definitely an experience I don't regret doing, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of learning in all this experience, actually.
First up, we're going to talk about redundancy in all its forms, aren't we? So our experiences of it, how we feel, reactions, what we do. So Karen, what happened?
Gosh. So what happened is it was such a weird thing. So on a Monday morning in August, I think it was maybe second week of August, there was a meeting that was put in the calendar to talk about operations update. And I knew that there was...
It's never a clear title, is it? It's never, we're going to talk about job cuts.
I know. Well, I guess they can't do that because everybody will go in panic mode, aren't they?
Were you worried about that title?
I wasn't. So there were some changes happening in the organization, and we've been having some changes happening for a while, right? So we had a new CEO coming in who had been announced to start in September. So I thought they were just going to talk about these things and also how we're moving to the cloud and things that are going to change, etc. So me being me,
This is at Cardlytics, yeah?
yeah, this is at Cardlytics. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
So me being me, I thought, you know what? I know what they're going to say. So I'm going to make the most of the time. And I had no food at home. That was around lunchtime. So I thought I'm going to go buy something to eat. Guess where I went? I went to Sainsbury's.
Yes. Even though I don't work there, I'm still invested and a shareholder. So very pleased.
Yeah. I remember how excited you were last time when I told you I was getting super excited about scratching the virtual card to win extra points. Yeah, so I was at Sainsbury's listening into that meeting where they basically said that 20% of the UK business was going to be made redundant for various reasons. So there were some things around the need to become profitable, but also the economic situations and all these things. And that was me basically completely shocked at Sainsbury's, crying, desperate for someone to give me a hug. And everybody just looking at me thinking I was crazy, walking around Sainsbury's, picking up my grocery and crying. So that's what happened. And then we had another meeting. So that was for each team to talk about. And for that meeting, I was back home and then I sat at my desk and properly took part in the conversation where they were saying that in my team, there were going to be two people so the whole team was at risk, but they needed to make two people redundant. It's a team of 6. So that's a third of the team. And yeah, so they initially asked for volunteers and we had 4 days to volunteer for redundancy. Outside of that, they would start picking people.
So how did you feel? What was your immediate reaction and action?
Yeah, so I think I had 2 reactions. The first one obviously was me crying in Sainsbury's because I couldn't believe that this was happening. I had been at Cardlytics for 5 years and a half. Cardlytics it's like a second family to me. The friends I've made there, I believe, are friends for life, especially being an expat, you know. Most of my childhood friends, they're in a different country. My family is definitely really far from London. So Cardlytics was kind of my second home, I want to say. So I was very sad. I understood why they went through that, but I was still very sad. The second thing I did was to call Roisin McCarthy from Women in Data and Data Tech. And I was like, Roisin, this is what's happening. What is the market like at the moment? If I volunteer for redundancy, will I get a job? And she said yes. And why I did that was that I had been asking myself for a while if I should stay or go from Cardlytics. While I love the company, as I said, it was a small team and I was starting to think about career progressions and all these things and whether it was possible there or not. I guess for me, it was what I needed to move on.
Mm. Yeah, the market's always going to be good, certainly in what we do. It's just a case of thinking about, well, don't just jump. If you want to stay, it sounded like there would have been a chance to and a new opportunity.
Yeah.
But if you'd been thinking about it for a while already, then it was maybe the kick you needed.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was speaking with Jenna Zhang in a previous episode, and we were talking about all the feeling we get when we decide to stay in an organization for a while, if we're missing out on learning new things because data moves so fast. There are always like new tools and all these things around. So making sure that we stay up to date was quite a challenge when you stay in one organization, especially one where the team is as small as 6 people. So that's what happened to me, really. How about you, Lizzie? How did you How did it happen and how did you feel about it?
Yeah, so much bigger shift where I was at Gymshark. So they were announcing 120 odd,
Oh gosh.
um, yeah, roles impacted. So it was therefore one of those scenarios. I'm sure many people listening to this will have been through this before, but when there's a certain number of people impacted, you have to go through consultation processes, which have a minimum number of days that they have to take. So even though it was announced right at the beginning of April, it didn't conclude until sometime in July. So a really, really long winded journey, I suppose, where lots of different things happened. And for me, the very first announcement, it was, to be honest, I didn't really understand it or know what the impact of it was. I knew that my role was in a list, but I wasn't overly surprised because we've been talking about restructures and planning, and it was that there was part of that plan was to bring some certain teams together, and I knew that there might be some changes. So that was all fine. But then it was completely different to what we talked about doing. It was a shock to my entire division, me and my bosses as well, when what actually happened. So they ended up cutting the entire data and insights division as it existed, including CDO, and just moving some of the roles, much fewer of the roles from our teams into other areas of the business within tech and brand. So it was, at the beginning I was like, okay, kind of knew this was coming, but then the more I read underneath it and realized it was completely different to what I knew was coming. So it took a few days to really even understand what was being announced, let alone then the details of it. So I remember on the first day, technically I was still on holiday, but I was on calls with my team, and luckily the team were just so mature and smart and they just looked out for each other and for me, and I was really lucky with the people I had. So I dialed onto a call with them, having been away for a couple of weeks. And I said to them, I remember saying to them, because there was a role that effectively my role was being merged with, I said, I'm going to go for that role. I'm going to do everything I can to get it. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that we continue to deliver everything we've been working on and plan to deliver and all that stuff. I was super positive and motivated and just saw this as a means to an end. Fast forward, a couple of working days and a weekend, and I come back the week after understanding a bit more about the new structure that was not what we had thought about before. And I gradually told all my team, sorry, I take it back. I will not be going for that role and will probably not be here to support you. However, this is what we're going to do in the meantime. So yeah, that was within the first week. And then it still probably took a couple more weeks to really understand why it was happening like this, the decisions behind it, or the rationale behind the decision, sorry, and what it meant for the people that might get to stay, and therefore helping everyone think about, well, should you stay or should you go? There was no voluntary redundancy. There were fewer roles that were ultimately there to do the same sort of work, but rather than calling colleagues or anything, it was a full, you're all redundant. If you want to do these jobs, you have to apply. So effectively, everybody could just take voluntary redundancy by not applying for those jobs. So that was the decision that everyone in my team had to make and I had to make. And we had plenty of time to do it whilst we were also at the same time trying to understand what was going on. So very different. I've been through restructures so many times before. Not that Sainsbury's has a habit of it, but every couple of years there was always a reorg. I was on the receiving end for several years and then the giving end for a few years as well. And it was so much planning and thought and energy that went into it, and all the paperwork was ready and all the job specs would be ready and all the I's would be dotted and T's would be crossed and everyone would be looked after for that entire day. And there'll be so much information that certainly nobody walks away from that not knowing or not understanding. Yeah. They might not like it, but at least they understand it. So yeah, it was a very different experience this time, not necessarily having that. Even when we did finally understand it, not buying into it and not understanding why. Like some of the rationale at Gymshark was wanting to get closer to the data, and so moving those roles closer to functions rather than necessarily having a data function, which is a reason why many of us didn't stick around for that, I suppose. But luckily the other person I mentioned my role was kind of getting merged with, she's brilliant. So I know that those in the team that did stay have, they're in very, very good hands, and I know that the work therefore can continue to be great. It took weeks, I think, a huge amount of seeking to understand and thinking and reflecting, and a lot of emotion where different people came to their own realization and at different speeds, and some people changed their mind a lot. Very interesting couple of months of that to start with, before then moving into okay, so how do we help people get jobs, what jobs, where is it going to be, what do I do, who do I start talking to, etc., etc.
Very different experiences, but also similar in some ways. So while, you mentioned the fact that for you we did have a consulting part as well, but I guess because of the difference in scale and number of people, it was much shorter. And for me, everything went so fast. But something that you said, so two things that you said resonated quite a lot with me. So the first one being, everyone being mature and professional and looking after each other. This is something that I observed as well. We were all supporting each other, making sure that we were still working, making sure everything was running smoothly, but supporting each other quite a lot. Coffee chats and all these things, and checking that everybody was doing fine and giving a hand where we could. And the other thing was the not knowing that you mentioned. So you mentioned that at Sainsbury's, when you were going through this, I want to say exercise, it's not an exercise, but going through redundancies, everything was structured and it was well thought and it had been done before. But this time around, it was, I want to say, maybe a bit chaotic, because you struggled to understand what it was. It was exactly the same for me. And that not knowing what's going to happen, what exactly the roles that are left are going to be, was quite stressful. And having to decide if I wanted to stay or if I wanted to put myself for redundancy was a very tough decision, not knowing what roles were going to be available.
Yeah, and you had to do that. You had to expedite that thinking, didn't you, as well?
Yeah, in 4 days, in just 4 days. But I do believe it worked out for the best, because as I said, I made friends for life, and Carlytics was such a period of growth for me. Massive personal development. I feel like a completely different person from when I joined. And I know people I met there, I'm still going to be in touch with them. I've already even set up a few catch-ups and all these things. So I know it's going to happen, but professionally, I'm off to different things. So that's super exciting. I want to know how you coped with all the stress and uncertainty.
Personally, I was quite naive for a while and almost just ignored it. Like, okay, this is happening, but I'm not the worst off here. So a lot of my team had a lot shorter notice periods than me. Some had kids on the way, some had kids already. There was a lot going on, and they had much shorter notice periods. So they were the priority around, okay, do you want a job here? Let's go all guns blazing to get it, or do you want to leave and let's make sure you get lots more money than you did here, and all that sort of stuff. So that was a really nice distraction. I suppose technically I was procrastinating my own, what do I do? But it was worthwhile doing that, I think. And I can't take any credit for any of their success either, by the way. They did it all on their own. But I really enjoyed doing their CVs more so than doing mine. And it was just a mixture of a nice atmosphere. I'm going to summarize it as a nice atmosphere, even though everybody was, going through turmoil and emotions, but at least everyone was going through it together, and you could just tell everybody wanted everyone else to succeed, and it was nice. And I think there's so many books and podcasts you can listen to about this experience where it's all about the opportunities and being resilient and what you do and how you deal with it and not burning bridges and all that sort of stuff. But on the other hand, you can just deal with that later. And for a while, you're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to be angry. I think anger was the main theme for a while, actually, in our team, in our division. And it probably still is for some. And that's okay. It's okay to feel how you feel and a lot of people had given up a lot to be there. Some had relocated their entire lives. And and most colleagues hadn't worked there very long, and so didn't qualify for any redundancy at all, just their notice period. So it's absolutely fine to feel like shit and go through those emotions and not have to be resilient. But then it's how long that takes you to get out of that, and then what you do afterwards that is what you should remember. But it's fine to be angry and sad.
I hear that, especially with people changing their whole life for it. And as you said at the beginning, when you join the organization, you can't know that these kind of things are going to happen. And if you haven't been there for a while and you can't qualify for redundancy, it can be quite, stressful, like for everyone, but adding to that.
Yeah. I think it was end of May or early June, which that's a song, isn't it? I don't know. End of May or early June was the deadline to apply for the roles. And I think once that deadline passed, of which I think it was about fewer than half, I think it was 40-something% of people actually even applied for a role. To show kind of the level of people that didn't. I don't hold me to that stat, but it was about that. And I think after that date passed and that deadline passed, everybody just got a bit of closure of, okay, I've made my decision that I'm not going to stay here. I can now focus on what's coming next. Some people delayed that a little bit because you could still apply and not do those jobs. Technically, you could apply and do a trial in the jobs and then still not do it and take redundancy. So some people may have delayed that decision, but certainly that drew a line in the sand for me of, right, I've made my decision that I won't be here anymore after some date in July that was defined as when the new structure would go live. So it wasn't until then really that I decided that's it, I won't be working here anymore.
I love how different we are sometimes. Well, for me, I guess also because it was a shorter time frame, but I went into planning mode straight away. So even before my voluntary redundancy was accepted, I went and I was like, okay, so how do I make this work? How do I make the most of it? So straight away, I was like, I need to find a job as soon as possible. Even though I knew that I would have my notice period paid and I would have redundancy paid, I was like, I am not staying without a job. I'm going to find a job and then I will see what I'm doing with, if I can take some time off and all these things. So
some people certainly did that where I was as well. There was one in particular who I called a bit of an applicant whore because they applied to everything and then they were in interviews all the time and then they were all jobs that they just ended up not wanting. And a month down the line and exhausted from all the interviews, none of those jobs were the ones they ended up doing at all. So I tried to be a bit more selective than that when I finally got into gear, but
yeah, well, I did get more selective when I looked for a job, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. But I think what I did that I felt was great is I remembered the very first episode I recorded when I published on the Women in Data podcast, which was with Janine Woodcock, and that was during the pandemic, so very start of the pandemic, April 2020. And she was talking about furlough, but the key takeaway was not to focus on things you can't control and shift your focus to what's within your control. And that's what I did. And it was quite helpful, along with speaking with various people from the community.
Yeah, I heard about you before I spoke to you, or you spoke to me. Because you've been chatting to so many people, I'd heard about you already.
I was just like, I need to start looking for a job. Honestly, I am terrified of being jobless. This is something that really scares me. So I definitely made the most of my network and tried to reach out to not as many people as possible, because I didn't want to be, you were talking about your colleague who was applying for every job possible and then was exhausted. I didn't want to be in that position, looking for a job. And I'm sure you can relate to that. It's like a full-time job. So for me doing that while going through redundancy and doing my job at the same time and supporting my direct report was not possible. So I thought, I'm going to do a few interviews now, talk to a few people, And then I was meant to go on holiday with my partner. And then when I'm back, I'm going to look for a job properly. But in the end, I found a job before coming back from holiday. That was quite handy.
So new job hunting.
Okay.
Usually the first step in that is a CV. Was that quick and easy for you? It must have been if your whole process was done so quickly.
So I'm a planning freak and I say that all the time. So CV is something that takes forever to do. So what I do is I try every couple of years to have my CV updated. And 2 years ago, I had taken on line management responsibilities and I felt like this was the perfect timing to update my CV. So I had updated my CV maybe a year and a half ago. So I had that to work from. So maybe it took me a day to update my CV. I sat on a Saturday and I was like, I'm going to do my CV now. I remember Roshin asking for a CV and I was like, I don't have a CV ready, Roshin. So yeah, I think it took me the whole Saturday to do the CV myself. Then I sent it to my manager for review. My manager is really great for everything that he's writing. So I just love the way he writes. He makes me wish I had paid more attention in English classes so I could write properly. So he reviewed my CV, helped me out. I absolutely wanted it to stay on 2 pages. So he helped me with that as well. And I'm super grateful, honestly. It was already very stressful to have to put the CV together, but knowing that he would be supportive. And I knew it was a really tough time for him because he had 2 members of his teams that were leaving. So him dealing with all that, but also supporting us into looking for a job was amazing. And I'm super grateful for that.
Nice.
Yeah. How about you, Lizzie? How did you deal with your CV?
I mean, you said you sat and did yours on a Saturday. I sat on my CV for weeks, just looking at it, saying this is awful. So I had briefly updated it from Sainsbury's to Gymshark, but it wasn't something I was proud of. I've always been proud of the actual kind of content, i.e., the things I've achieved, but certainly not in how I can present that content or share what I can do or should be doing next. I think what you've necessarily done before isn't necessarily what you want to do next, and so it's quite hard to tell that story and get that balance right. It's certainly something I really struggled with, and even when I got feedback, it was a mixture of yeah, it's great, or no, it's not, rather than necessarily what I should do with it. And I was quite repetitive throughout it as well. So I got some help. I asked lots of people for help, but then there was one person who really, really did help and helped me to hack it down so that it was still on 2 pages, but the font could be a nice size 11 rather than the tiny kind of 8 that I had before, and make it actually have spaces in it and still tell a story that I wanted to tell. And at the top really talk about kind of this is who I am, this is what I can do, this is what I can give, and this is what I'd like to be doing. And that's all really that it needs to say. So getting that proper help from somebody who was just brutally honest and gave me good advice that I could follow, that was priceless. But I think I would have asked dozens of people before I got to that person. So I think, yeah, if you're not getting the advice that helps you, just maybe keep asking.
Yeah, I do believe that the feedback is quite impactful because you can write your CV the way you want to read it, but then hiring managers might want to see something different.
Yeah, I'm much better at dealing with, certainly with my teams, because I know what I'd be looking for and what was important to me. But certainly with my own, I struggle with knowing what that would be. So yeah, I was glad to get the help.
So it's funny that both of us wanted our CV to be on 2 pages. What's your view on longer CVs?
I don't really have a view. I mean, I know that cliche is it's frowned upon to be more than 2, but what is also bad is what I was doing, which was making the font really, really tiny so that it still fit on 2. So I think the point is that you want to make it digestible and land your points quickly, not necessarily that it has to be on 2 pages. I think that's more the what we're going for.
Definitely agree with that.
And then in terms of like when you've been sending your CV out, the responses are really different in terms of how they're used as well. Like in some scenarios, it's been highlighted and I've had very specific questions asked about it. In other, like all the way from top to bottom. In others, it's as if they haven't read it at all, and I have to almost talk them through it. And then in others, they literally openly said, I haven't read it. I don't need to. HR or the recruitment agency have given you to me. So I'm going to assume you're qualified. Now let's just talk. So yeah, it's completely mixed experiences of how the CV gets used.
Same with you. I had some people going through my CV, but also people not even asking for my CV. And I feel like I had a better conversation with people who had not read my CV than people who had.
Interesting. I don't know if they were better. They were different. They definitely went in different directions. I think my CV changed kind of halfway through my interview journey, in my recruitment journey. And then my experiences did change actually from my older CV to my newer one.
Okay.
So yeah, a better CV definitely led to better conversations because I was more involved in processes where the job suited me rather than being in jobs that maybe didn't suit me as much, but my CV misled or wasn't clear. So I ended up in all sorts of things.
I love that. So your CV was misleading and then leading people to believe you would be interested in jobs that you are not after.
Yeah, it was certainly I am and have been an analyst that now leads, and I think I really wanted to make that point. So I ended up in perhaps a lot more processes that were requiring a lot more hands-on than perhaps I wanted to do, rather than when I reframed it to be actually I'm a leader of analysts. I'm a leader of these things, and this is what I'm interested in putting my energy towards. Then they were the jobs I actually ended up spending more time on after that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And I can relate to that as well. This whole analyst that leads and how hands-on you're going to be in your role and how you can actually show through interviews and through your CVs that you can do analysis or you can also lead a team is quite difficult, especially when you are at this sweet spot where you might end up doing both in your role.
Yeah. And then pitching yourself at the right level is tricky because job titles are an absolute headache of understanding. They're so random. You could be a director of or a vice president of something, but then only have one direct report. Or you could be a manager somewhere else and have a team of like 50. So you just can't read into job titles. Instead, you have to explore the right things. So how many people does this person manage, or what's their responsibility? How much budget do they have, or who do they report into? You have to kind of ask those sorts of questions instead.
Yeah, job titles are a headache.
I've got so much better over this process of like asking really brutal questions at the beginning. Like there was one job, which, on paper looked great. Another one of those greenfield opportunities, i.e. come and start and do everything and grow it, which I wasn't adverse to. But I very quickly was just like, what money is on offer here? And then just shut the whole conversation down really quickly because the amount of times that comes too late and then you've wasted loads of time.
Yeah, so really knowing what you're up for at the beginning rather than figuring it out towards the end of the process is quite important because you don't want to spend days applying for a job and then going through interviews and then finding out that this is not what you want to do. So
yeah, we talked at the beginning, didn't we, about how it's a full-time job.
So you went through the process of looking for jobs and all these things, and we're going to talk in the next episode about the recruitment process and things that we felt were right and things we felt were not so right and how we could make things better. But I'm curious to hear about, with your experience of looking for a new job, is there anything that you wish you had done differently?
Oh, that's a good question. I wish I hadn't progressed various processes that I could just tell I didn't want to do. I actually pulled out of a few and I got better at pulling out of them the more I learned. Some I just used as burning exercises, like burn this one, burn that one as interview practice. That actually was really useful because I haven't really done this before, like ever. Because even going from Sainsbury's to Gymshark, I did go through the recruitment process, but it was a role that I knew I could do, and it was working for somebody that I knew quite well, and it didn't feel like a scary experience. Plus, it was just one process,
Yeah.
whereas this was a lot of processes all at once. And I think doing one process at a time although, it doesn't move very quickly, it's manageable, and you can definitely do that whilst you're in a job. Doing what we've just done, or what I've just done, which was kind of full-time job hunting, it's exhausting, and you end up working for people without getting paid. So I think I would definitely pull out of processes earlier if I knew it wasn't the one for me. What else do I wish I'd done differently? I did engage network, but not very well. So a lot of the people I engaged, they didn't have jobs themselves to give, but I didn't really lean on them for other things. And I think that's the nature of what I'm looking for, really. It's not, the people aren't just looking for them and just waiting for somebody to pop up. Is there a need for that role? And they usually use recruitment agents or exec search agencies to find those people. I'm not sure how to use the network to find the role. I think it helps with, what I found useful with my network is talking to people about companies. So if there's a job at a company, I might know several people there already, or people that have passed through. That's where I engage network to find out more about them, or to prep for an interview with somebody who I know others have worked with before, or something like that, or just to talk about companies. So I've used my network in prep, really, and in decision making.
Yeah, and that's super useful, right? Because you want to know what you're getting yourself into, and if there is a job that you're interested, you want to be ready for the interview.
Yeah, so that was really helpful. But certainly I didn't engage network to find those opportunities in the first place, or I didn't really know how to, and I still don't really.
While I definitely engage my network in terms of looking for a job, and what I felt like doing was just going to a few specific people I knew could help, chat with them, and then see what would happen from that. But something I wish I had done differently was definitely to put less pressure on myself to find a job that fast. And I hear what you're saying about, so, you were talking about pulling out earlier from the recruitment process and all these things, especially for roles you knew you didn't want to do. This is something that happened to me so many times in the past. So I used to, as I said before, I'm terrified of not having a job. And because of that, I used to let people talk me into doing interviews that I didn't want to do. So this time I approached it in a sense of, this is not going to happen. I'm going to be owning the whole thing and say no. So I had this list of non-negotiables and things I want. That was very aggressive and so unlike me, if I'm honest.
That's great. What was on that list?
On the non-negotiable. So flexibility. I love the fact that during the lockdown, well, thanks to the lockdown, we work from home more often. So I definitely wanted some kind of hybrid work, but also being able to work remote from a different country, so I can go visit my family and work from there. So that was one. Another one was making sure that the organization is open to people with side hustles, because I run a podcast. So I didn't want to give up on that. And what was the last one? I can't remember what the last one was, but this was the two main ones. So that was that. But because I was so focused on finding a job straight away, I feel like I was already at a space where emotionally it was quite difficult. So I properly exhausted myself. Thankfully, it didn't last long, but I feel like if it had lasted longer than that, I would have been in a terrible position. So really making sure that I would have processed my emotions first and then got into looking for a job, maybe would have been a better approach.
Yeah, I think that's a good reflection to have. Although we'll talk about this in a minute, but what you have ended up with sounds great. So it's worked out. Although you haven't started it yet, so maybe it won't work out. We can chat maybe after a few weeks in. But I think I got better at adjusting my method as I went, and there was some good advice that my ex-line manager, most recent line manager, had, which was, he got to a point where he was going to interviews and just saying, you know what, this is who I am, this is what I can do. Is that what you need? And that was really helpful for me to bring to my processes as well, because I didn't want to, there were some jobs where I was like, okay, I can do X percent of it, but not the Y percent. But I'm just going to be upfront about that from the beginning. Be like, this is what I can do. That's what I've not done before, but I'm up for learning that. Or whatever, and just doing the process as transparently and authentically as I could. And that way, I think the right opportunities then come to you.
Yeah.
So that was good advice.
Hi again. Thank you so much for listening to part 1. I hope you found it interesting. In the second part of this mini-series, Lizzie and I will be discussing the recruitment processes we went through and commenting on some inefficiencies that we believe can be fixed. You're working full-time and it's like you have to do a take-home assignment.
I hate them when I'm not even working full-time. I've done a few of those this summer and I've not enjoyed any of them. Like, I read through one, there were 2 separate tasks, and I thought, this is going to take me at least a week to do these. And they want me to come in on a Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. into some remote corner of London for a job that I wasn't even sure I wanted.
Do you want to hear more? Stay tuned for the release on the 8th of December.